Three Corners is just your average small town, standing on the banks of a flood-prone river with a large pub anchoring the village at a once-famous three-way intersection. Now it's simply convenient, as people chase the country dream, the country lifestyle, just not the unceasing agricultural workload. Population, 2,000-ish. But like all small towns, scratch the surface and you'll be surprised at what you find underneath. In that sense, Three Corners is really no different to any other small town I know, except perhaps for some of the characters you might meet. The long weekend. It was a crisp autumnal morning in Three Corners. The air held the scent of fires newly lit. The utes of the tradies had zoomed out in the dawn to the city. But it was, as yet, too early for the school-aged children to be walking in ones and twos along the scraggly cement footpaths, a parent glued to their phone just a few steps behind. Yesterday, people would swear that the leaves on all the trees were green, and yet today their surprise very real. Yellows and reds adorned the branches that overhung gardens and cars. Some leaves even daring to tumble early in the light breeze, although not nearly enough to kick or scuff in. On the day before a long weekend, the last day of school before the holidays, the blue skies held the promise of a vivid anticipation. You see, there was a plan afoot. There was someone in the village who'd been waiting and watching for years. And this year they were putting their carefully constructed plan into action. There were reams of notes, spreadsheets, and an accumulation of folders. Records of who stayed, who left town, and who would be having visitors. Who left windows open, who had dogs, or even those funny doorbells that seemed to record everything. And it was all cross-referenced with who had CCTV, who was getting CCTV, and who had cameras as deterrents not hooked up to anything. The disguise was bought, the essential requirements attained. The list checked, double-checked, and memorised, all of which would be destroyed afterwards, and only if it went off without a hitch. It was a complicated scheme in the making, and it had to be perfect. Everything was bought out of town in cash. Nothing was searched for or bought online. There was to be no trace. And it helped that the equinox was past, the moon was waning crescent, and the nights were dark. The council hadn't got around to fixing the street lights yet, and almost every second one had blown its bulb. By 10 in the evening, the barbecues were finished, children put to bed or glued to movies. The night fishers had taken home their catches, and the night walkers were yet to dress for their promenade. All was quiet, and all was still as the village map was rolled out, and from a small weatherboard cottage at the end of Mill Lane, a text, wishing the recipient good night, started the ball rolling. There were more shadows in Three Corners that night, more movement, more hushed tones. The night walkers who strolled in the early hours saw it all, but true to their code, they said nothing. They watched, they wondered, but kept silent and walked on. By dawn, the mission was accomplished, and with the aroma of cinnamon and coffee, shrieks and squeals started up all over the village, waking up neighbours who made their own discoveries and added their disbelief to the rising morning cacophony. There was even a phone call made to the police station. It had been hit as well. The tired sergeant was completely unconcerned at the outrage on the line. He agreed, though, and assured the caller he would look into it.
Yep. No worries, Mrs. Jones. What did they leave? Oh, that's a bit fancy. Okay, yes. Terrible business, this. I'll look into it for you.
Then he slowly took the giant Easter egg he found outside the station and added it to the basket of fresh cinnamon buns he found on his doorstep. The CCTV footage brought in by scores of parents with sugar-laden children, their mouths smeared with Easter feasting, bright happy eyes and necklaces made of coloured foil, showed that large, human-sized rabbits were the ones responsible for visiting each house in the village that night, leaving or hiding treats. He didn't look too carefully into it, of course, despite the faint traces of black whiskers and pink noses on the book club members. After all, chocolate at Easter was hardly criminal. Today's episode of Three Corners was produced by our maestro,
Posty.
and featured the spelt-like tones of
Greg.
and Jack. For more stories, head to talesfrom3corners.com.au or subscribe to wherever you listen to your favourite podcasts.